Would you be our son just for one weekend? The old man's voice cracked like dry wood. His hands were trembling. His eyes were full of something Cole Anderson hadn't seen in a long time, not fear, not desperation, but something far more dangerous. Up. Cole stood in that parking lot, 60,000 miles of open road behind him, 30 years of hard living written across his face, and for the first time in all of it, absolutely nothing to say. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see together just how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you see everything. Anderson had buried his wife on a Thursday. He remembered that detail more than anything else about that day, not the color of the sky, not the names of the people who showed up, not even the words the preacher said over the grave. He remembered it was a Thursday because he had ridden to the cemetery alone. On the way back, every diner he passed was running a Thursday special. Roast, mashed potatoes, pie, the kind of meal somebody's wife would have made. He hadn't eaten pot roast since. That was 11 years ago. And in those 11 years, Cole Anderson had built himself a life that left very little room for the kind of pain that came from sitting still. He led. He showed up when his brothers needed him. Organized charity runs for veterans, for sick kids, food banks out in counties where the government had long since stopped pretending to care. He wore his road captain patch-like armor, and most days, they're well enough to work enough to fool everyone, including himself. He was 50 years old, gray beard, thick forearms that looked like it had been carved out of the same Tennessee limestone as the hills he rode through every weekend. Kind of man who walked into a room and made other people instinctively straighten up. Kind of man strangers did not approach unless they were in real trouble, which was exactly why on that particular Tuesday evening in October, when an old man in a faded military cap followed Cole Anderson out of a roadside diner in Harlan County and touched his arm with trembling fingers, Cole turned around instead of riding away, because something in that touch said, "This is real trouble." It had been a long day. The city ride had stretched nearly 200 miles a loop through 4 counties, organized by Cole and a dozen of his Hells Angels brothers, raising money for Vietnam veterans who were still fighting their own government 40 years after the last helicopter left Saigon. Every year for 6 years. Cole planned the route, the permits, dealt with the local sheriffs who were never quite sure what to do with a column of Hells Angels showing up in their jurisdiction with a donation check. Most years, those sheriffs ended up shaking Cole's hand at the end. The ride wrapped and Cole peeled off from the group to head home. He was tired in the way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. It was the other kind of tired, the kind that settled in behind the eyes and behind the sternum and didn't move no matter how fast you rode. He'd stopped at the diner, mostly because he needed coffee. He'd been inside maybe 20 minutes, sitting at the counter, nursing a cup that had been refilled twice without him asking. The waitress, a young woman with a name tag that said Brenda and the look of someone working a double shift on 4 hours of sleep, had left him alone after the first refill. She'd read him correctly. He wasn't there for conversation. He was halfway through his 3rd cup when he noticed them. The couple was sitting near the window. He hadn't paid them much attention at first. An old man and an old woman, both somewhere deep into their 70s or 80s, sharing a booth the way people share space when they've been sharing it for 60 years. They moved around each other without bumping. They knew each other's rhythms the way 2 trees that have grown next to each other for decades bend around each other's branches. Something was wrong. There were 3 meals on the table. Registered it without fully thinking about it at first. 2 people, 3 plates. He glanced again. Yes, 3 plates. Directly across from the old woman against the window. Untouched. The silverware was still wrapped in the paper napkin. A glass of water beside it had a lemon wedge that hadn't been squeezed. The man was eating slowly, carefully, the way men eat when they're not really hungry, but have decided they ought to. The woman, white hair pinned back, a small gold cross at her throat, was holding her fork. But she wasn't eating. She was looking at the third plate, very quietly, in a way that she was clearly trying to hide, crying. Cole looked away. He wasn't trying to stare. Whatever was happening at that table was private, and Cole Anderson had lived long enough to know that some grief is not meant to be witnessed by strangers. He drank his coffee. He stared at the counter. He left Brenda a 20 on a $9 check, almost at the door when Brenda caught his eye. She gave him the smallest nod toward the window table, a nod that said, "You saw it too, right?" Cole looked back at the old couple one more time. The old woman had stopped crying. She was sitting up straight, posing herself, putting the fork down with the deliberate dignity of a woman who had survived many hard things and intended to survive this one too. The old man was watching her, not eating, just watching her. The way you watch someone you love when you know there's nothing you can do to help. Cole pushed through the door. The cold air hit him. We in Tennessee had teeth. He unzipped his vest pocket and pulled out his gloves. To his bike, checked the saddlebag out of habit. The night was quiet out here, no traffic on the 2-lane, the sound of wind moving through the tree line, and a distant dog somewhere making its opinions known. He put his leg over the seat, and then the diner door opened behind him. The footsteps before he turned. Slow, careful steps, the steps of a man whose knees argued with him every time he stood. Cole turned and saw the old man crossing the parking lot toward him. One hand slightly out for balance, the other clutching his military cap to his chest. Cole didn't move. The old man stopped about 4 feet away, further than Cole had expected, maybe 6 feet once, though age had taken some of that, with silver hair and a face full of lines that told the story of a life lived mostly outdoors. Eyes were dark and steady, and despite the trembling in his hands, they were not the eyes of a man who was confused or afraid. They were the eyes of a man who had decided to do something very difficult and was going to do it anyway. But he looked at Cole for a long moment, just looked at him, like he was making sure of something. Then he said it. "Would you be our son just for one weekend?" The question landed the way a stone lands in still water. Cole felt the ripples move through him before his mind had even fully processed the words. He said nothing. For a long moment, he genuinely could not speak. The old man's chin lifted slightly. His jaw was tight. Cole was not embarrassed. He had made a decision, and he was standing in it. "My name is Thomas Parker," he said. "That's my wife." Inside. "We have a farm about 12 miles north of here." He stopped. He swallowed. "We had a son. His name was Michael. Passed 8 years ago." His voice held on the word. Passed the way a man holds on to a fence post in high wind. "Every year on this date, we come to this diner. It was his favorite place. After his meal, we leave a place for him." Cole's hands were still on the handlebars. "They're asking what you're thinking," Misa said, and there was something almost firm in his voice now. He was used to people doubting him and had stopped apologizing for it, thinking, "I'm a crazy old man who doesn't know what he's asking." "Maybe you're right. But I watched you in there. I watched how you left that money for the girl. Watched how you saw us and looked away because you didn't want to intrude." He paused. Used to do the same thing. He used to see people and look away so they wouldn't feel watched. But then he'd find some other way to help. Cole exhaled slowly. He started. "I'm not asking you to pretend," Thomas said, firmly. "I'm not asking for something fake. I know you're not Michael. I know there's no replacing him. Oh, that better than any person alive." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "We have one weekend left, the anniversary of his passing. The days we always spent together as a family. And this year," he stopped again, his lips together. "This year, Evelyn said she wasn't sure she could do it alone anymore. And I realized I wasn't sure either." Somewhere behind them, inside the diner, Cole could see the old woman through the window. She hadn't followed her husband out. She was still at the table, sitting straight, not looking toward the parking lot. She was giving her husband privacy to do this hard thing. Image hit Cole somewhere in the center of his chest and didn't move. "How long ago did you lose her?" Thomas asked suddenly. Went still. "What?" "Your wife," Thomas said simply. "You're wearing her ring." on your right hand. Men don't usually move a ring to the right hand unless they've lost someone and can't bring themselves to take it off completely. Cole looked down at his right hand, a gold band on his ring finger. 11 years, and he'd never quite been able to take it off. He'd moved it, that was all. Told himself it was practical. Himself a road captain couldn't be going around looking like he was still married to a woman who had been in the ground for more than a decade. Well, he had never once admitted to himself that he moved it because he couldn't let it go. I'm sorry, Thomas said, and he meant it in the clean, uncomplicated way that old men sometimes mean things. I shouldn't have. 3 years after I came home from the Gulf, Cole said. He didn't know why he said it. He hadn't talked about Rachel to anyone outside his closest brothers in years. She got sick. It took her fast. He cleared his throat. Didn't have kids. Thomas nodded slowly. He didn't say he was sorry again. He just nodded, like a man receiving information he was going to hold carefully. But Thomas said quietly, what it's like to sit in a house full of someone who isn't there anymore. Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. Thomas looked at him with those steady dark eyes. For the weekend, he said. That's all. 2 days. You can leave Sunday evening and never look back. No obligations. No strings. He searched for the word. Just be present. All. That's the only thing we need from you. To be present. Cole's jaw was tight. He was looking at a point somewhere past Thomas's shoulder, beyond the parking lot where the trees started. He could feel the motorcycle under him, the familiar weight, promise of open road. He thought about his house in Knoxville. Homes he'd carefully arranged so he never had to sit in the one where Rachel used to read. The refrigerator with just enough in it for one person. The way he always drove past the diner on Thursday so he didn't have to smell pot roast. About how he had spent 11 years building a life that was very, very full and somehow at the exact same time entirely empty. Cole said finally. It's 12 miles north? Thomas straightened slightly. Old Route 7. You can't miss the mailbox. Then put a red rooster on it back in 1978 and we never changed it. Cole sat there for another long moment. Then he said, let me call my chapter. Thomas's face didn't change. Something in his eyes shifted, something small and quiet and enormous at the same time. Sure, take your time, he said. He put his military cap back on his head with the careful precision of a man putting on armor. We'll be finishing our coffee. He turned and walked back toward the diner, as steadily, like a man who had done the hardest thing and could now wait for whatever came next. Cole watched him go. Then he pulled out his phone. His VP, a man named Dirtbag, whose actual name was Derek, and who had an MBA from Vanderbilt that he mentioned to exactly no one picked up on the second ring. You still on the road? Dirtbag asked. I'm at a diner in Harlan County, Cole said. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make a thing out of it. Brief silence. I'm definitely going to make a thing out of it. An old man just walked out of a diner and asked me to spend the weekend at his farm, pretending to be his dead son. There was a longer silence. One more time, Dirtbag said. You heard me, and you're considering it. I already said yes. An even longer silence. Carefully, Cole, brother. Are you okay? I don't know, Cole said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in a long time. Owen, I'll check in tomorrow. He hung up before Dirtbag could say anything else. On the bike for another minute. The cold air moved through the parking lot. Through the diner window, he could see Thomas sliding back into the booth across from Evelyn. He could see Thomas lean across the table and say something to her. See her face clearly from this distance. He saw her hand come across the table and cover her husband's. Cole took a slow breath. He pulled his gloves back on, started the engine, backed the bike out of the spot. And instead of pointing it toward the interstate and home, he drove it to the front of the diner, cut the engine, and walked back inside. Thomas and Evelyn looked up when the door opened. His face was composed and careful. Evelyn's, and this was the moment Cole would think about. For a long time afterward, Evelyn's face had the particular expression of someone who had stopped hoping and then, very suddenly, against all their own defenses, started hoping again. Cole took off his cap. He pulled out the stool at the end of their table, the open side, and sat down. Ma'am, he said to Evelyn, my name is Cole Anderson. Thomas tells me you could use some company this weekend. Evelyn Parker looked at him for a moment. Eyes were very blue and very clear, and they looked at him the way only certain women of a certain age can look at you. Like they are seeing not just your face, but all the years behind your face, all the roads you've taken and the ones you didn't. Sorry, she said. Cole almost smiled. I could eat. She signaled to Brenda without turning her head, the reflexive, conscious gesture of a woman who had spent decades making sure people around her were fed. Looked at the third place at the table, the untouched plate, still wrapped silverware, the lemon wedge floating in the water glass. Tell me about Michael, he said, and something in Thomas Parker's face cracked open, not with grief, but with relief. The relief of a man who has been carrying a name in silence for so long that hearing someone else say it out loud feels like setting down a weight he'd forgotten he was carrying. Thomas said, "Motherboard," and his voice steadied as he said it. Kind of man who showed up. That's the best way I know to put it. Then the needed doing, Michael showed up. Didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter whose problem it was. Thomas spread his hands on the table. Up. Evelyn was quiet. She was looking at the third plate again. She wasn't crying anymore. He used to eat his pie first, she said suddenly. Every time we came here, he'd say, Mom, life is short. Start with what matters. She paused. He was 29 years old when he said that, and I thought he was being silly. I know he was right. Cole sat with that for a moment. Then Brenda came back with the coffee pot, and Cole held out his cup. And for the next 2 hours, the three of them sat at that table in the small diner in Harlan County. And Cole Anderson listened to Thomas and Evelyn Parker talk about their son. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He asked a question here and there, and each question opened a new door. And through every door, there was another story about a man named Michael Parker who had spent his whole life showing up for people who needed him. Fire department, the neighbors, the kids in town who needed someone to teach them how to work on a car engine or fix a fence or just pay attention to them for an hour. Listen to all of it. And with every story, he felt something shift inside him that he couldn't quite name. Grief, exactly. Not longing, though it was close. Then closer to recognition, like hearing about a place you've never been, but that sounds in some specific and impossible way like home. By the time they left the diner, it was past 10 o'clock. Evelyn had paid the check before Cole even knew she'd signaled for it. He argued she'd waved him off with the particular efficiency of a woman who had made up her mind. Best, she said simply. Guests don't pay. Thomas and Evelyn drove a truck that was older than some of Cole's chapter members, a faded blue Ford with a cracked dashboard and a set of rosary beads hanging from the rearview mirror. Cole followed them on the motorcycle, watching the truck's brake lights through the dark curves of Route 7. After about 12 miles, he saw the mailbox. There was a red rooster on it, hand-painted, somewhat faded red rooster that had been standing guard over that mailbox since 1978 and apparently intended to go right on standing guard until further notice. Cole followed the truck down the gravel drive. The farm appeared in the truck's headlights, a two-story white farmhouse with a porch that ran the full length of the front and set back to the left, a workshop beside it. The yard had an old oak tree big enough to have its own history. Their swing hung from one of the lower branches, still and silent in the night air. Thomas helped Evelyn out of the truck with the automatic steadiness of a man who had been doing it for decades. He had smoothed her coat, looked around at the yard the way people look around familiar places they love not to see anything new, confirm it's still there. She looked up at the farmhouse. Then she looked at Cole. Michael's room is upstairs, she said. Second door on the left. Clean sheets on the bed. There's a reading light on the nightstand if you want it. Thank you, Cole said. Thomas was already on the porch, holding the door open. Cole walked up the porch steps, under the yellow light, and into the house. The living room smelled like wood polish and something sweet, a candle burning on the side table. There were pictures on the mantel, family photographs spanning decades, a wedding portrait of Thomas and Evelyn that looked like it was taken sometime in the late 1960s. Pictures, holiday pictures. And in the center of the mantle, really larger than the others, a framed plain dark wood, a photograph of a young man in a firefighter's gear, grinning at the camera, the way people grin when they don't know someone's taking the picture. Darker. Cole looked at the photograph for a long moment. A good face, clear, a face that made people feel immediately or instinctively that they were being seen. He looked like his father around the jaw and his mother around the eyes, like a man who started with pie. Second door on the left, Evelyn said gently. And Cole, he nodded, took the stairs. The second door on the left was closed. Cole put his hand on the knob for a moment before he opened it. Wasn't sure what he expected. A shrine, maybe. A room frozen in time. The way some parents preserve their children's rooms, every trophy in place, every poster on the wall, every book exactly where it had been left. It wasn't like that. The room was clean and simple. Bed with a quilt that had the particular softness of something washed hundreds of times. Nightstand, a bookshelf with a mix of practical books, farming guides, manuals, a couple of worn paperback novels, a small wooden desk in the corner. The room didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a room someone still lived in, a room that was being kept ready. Cole sat on the edge of the bed. He was still in his riding gear. He hadn't even taken his vest off. Back in the quiet of Michael Parker's room and listened to the house settle around him, the creak of Thomas and Evelyn moving around downstairs. Low murmur of Evelyn, saying something he couldn't make out. The kitchen faucet running briefly. The sounds of people getting ready for bed. Ounce of a house that had two people in it. Cole looked at the desk, at the bookshelf, at the simple life contained in this simple room. The life of a man who had spent himself in service of other people and hadn't left behind trophies or monuments, just a clean room and a tire swing and parents who still set a place for him at the table. He reached up and finally unzipped his vest. He pulled out his phone and sent Dirtbag a one-line text. "I'm here. I'll explain when I can." Dirtbag's response came 30 seconds later. And Cole, be good to them. Cole set the phone on the nightstand. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Outside the window, the October wind was moving through the trees. And somewhere in the distance, a truck went by on the main road. The sound faded and left nothing behind but the quiet of a farm at night. Paul Anderson, a captain, hellsangels, 50 years old, a man who had spent 11 years building a life that kept the silence out, lay down on Michael Parker's bed, Michael Parker's quilt, under Michael Parker's ceiling. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't run from the quiet. He just let it be there. And what surprised him, in the last moment before he fell asleep, it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for something. He would find out what that was before the weekend was over. He closed his eyes. For now, that was enough. Cole woke up before the sun. He didn't know what pulled him out of sleep, a sound, a dream, some old instinct from years of early morning rides. He lay still for a moment in Michael Parker's bed, Michael Parker's room, staring at a ceiling he didn't recognize. For exactly 3 seconds, he forgot where he was. Came back to him. The diner, the parking lot, old man with the trembling hands and the steady eyes, rooster on the mailbox, the quilt, the quiet. He sat up. From downstairs, he could already hear movement, particular creak of a specific floorboard, the third one from the kitchen doorway. He'd learn later, and the low clank of a cast iron pan being set on a burner. Coffee was already working its way up through the old farmhouse, the way smells move through old houses, and completely, the way water moves through soil. He ran a hand over his face. He had slept 6 hours, maybe 7, straight through, no waking. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. Usually he was up twice, 3 times, lying in the dark in his Knoxville house, counting the sounds that weren't there. As Rachel used to make, the particular rhythm of another person breathing in the same space. On his boots and went downstairs. Evelyn was at the stove. She was wearing a housecoat, and her hair was still pinned back exactly as it had been the night before. Though she had never unpinned it, she turned when she heard his boots on the stairs and didn't look surprised at all that he was up this early. she said, as if he'd been sitting at that table his whole life. Cole sat down. There were 2 mugs already on the table. He ordered his coffee without asking how he took it. She set cream and sugar within reach without commenting. Back to the stove. Thomas is in the barn, she said. He gets up at 4:30, has since he was 19 years old. I've spent 61 years trying to convince him that the farm will still be there at 6, and he doesn't believe me. Has he ever tried sleeping past 5? Cole asked. Evelyn said, 1987. We had an ice storm and I told him the barn could wait. It lasted until 5:15 and then I heard him putting his boots on. She paused, looking at the pan. I didn't argue. Some things about a man you just decide to love the way they are. Cole held the mug in both hands. About Rachel and the way she used to reorganize his tool chest every 6 months because she couldn't stand how he sorted the wrenches. He used to act irritated. He would give anything now to come home and find his wrenches reorganized. Sleep, all right? Evelyn asked. Better than I have in a while, Cole said. She didn't respond to that directly, but he saw her shoulders settle slightly. The way someone's shoulders settle when they've been holding a question and have now received an answer that's good enough. She set a plate in front of him before he'd realized she'd finished cooking. Eggs, toast, sliced tomatoes, a whole pile of something that turned out to be home-fried potatoes with onion. He looked at the plate and then looked at her. You didn't have to do this, he said. I know I didn't, she said, and sat down across from him with her own plate. I do it because I want to. There's a difference. They ate in a quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. Inside, he could hear the distant sound of something Thomas, probably, moving around in the barn. The clink of metal on metal. Purposeful sounds of a man at work. After a few minutes, Mary set down her fork. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, ma'am. Last night, when Thomas came out to the parking lot, what made you say yes? Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned his mug in a slow circle. He thought about the honest answer and decided to give it. I saw your face through the window, he said. When Thomas leaned over and said something to you, see what you looked like clearly. But I saw your hand come across the table and cover his. He paused. Look, my wife used to do that. When I was struggling with something and trying not to show it, she'd just put her hand on mine and she wouldn't say anything. She was saying, I see you, I'm here. He cleared his throat. I figured anybody who still does that for each other after 60-some years is worth a weekend. Evelyn was very still. 61 years, she said after a moment. 61 years, Cole said. She picked up her fork again. Rachel, she said quietly. What was her name? That was her name. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was, Cole said. I would have liked you. She had absolutely no patience for self-pity, cutting her own. He glanced up, no offense. Evelyn looked at him sharply for a half-second. And then to his surprise, she laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, sudden and warm. The laugh of a woman who had forgotten for a moment that she was in the middle of grief and had briefly been ambushed by something genuinely funny. No offense taken, she said. Michael used to say the same thing about me. He'd say, Mom, you could fall off a ladder, and on the way down you'd be thinking about who else needed dinner. Sounds right, Cole said. She was smiling now. It didn't erase the sadness from her face, it couldn't. Stood that. It was in there too deep for that, but it was there alongside it. It was real. Tell me about the farm, Cole said. And that was when everything began to shift, because the look that crossed Evelyn's face at that question was not the look of a woman being asked a pleasant question over breakfast. It was something quicker than that and darker, and she controlled it fast but not fast enough. Good farm, she said, carefully. Thomas has worked it for over 50 years. But, Cole said, even looked at him. She measured him. You could see her doing it. See her deciding, behind those clear blue eyes, exactly how much this stranger at her table had earned. There are some difficulties, she said. What kind of difficulties? She shook her head slightly. Come here for our troubles, Mrs. Parker, Cole said, his voice even. I'm a road captain for a motorcycle club. My job, my actual job, not the one people assume I have when they see the vest my job, is to identify problems before they become disasters. I'm fairly good at it. He paused. What kind of difficulties? Evelyn set her fork down. She folded her hands on the table. She said nothing for a moment. Liberato. Then she looked him straight in the eye and she said it plainly. Hey, people state plain things when they've decided to stop dancing around them. Property taxes, she said. We are significantly behind. They have scheduled the farm for auction. She paused. 9 days. The number hit Cole like a flat tire at speed. Everything in him sharpened at once. 9 days, he said. 9 days, how far behind? She told him. He didn't flinch, but he made a note in his head, the kind of note a road captain makes, but specific and practical, before he starts thinking about solutions. Thomas knows? Cole asked. Thomas knows everything. He's known since the spring. Her voice was steady, but he could hear what it was costing her. He has been trying to fix it himself. He's tried selling equipment, or doing work for neighbors, borrowing from people he shouldn't have had to borrow from. Like to ask for help. She paused. He never has. Michael was the same way, Cole said. All thinking. He didn't know why he said it. He hadn't known Michael. From everything he'd heard, the night before the fire department, neighbors, the free repairs, the showing up, he'd built a picture clear enough that it felt true. And looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. He was exactly the same way. The back door opened, came in, stamping his boots at the threshold out of 40 years of habit, and saw Cole at the table, and something in his expression, a thin wire of anxiety that Cole hadn't noticed the night before, loosened by about a fraction. Thomas said, "Morning," Cole said. Thomas looked at Evelyn. The whole conversation passed between them in approximately 1 second, the way long marriages communicate, not in words, but in the exact calibration of a glance. Thomas poured himself coffee and sat down. There was a brief silence. Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Tell me, Cole said. Thomas wrapped his hands around his mug. His hands were enormous, the hands of a man who had done physical work every day of his adult life. They were also, Cole now noticed, shaking slightly. With age, with something harder to name. I want you to know, Thomas said, and carefully, that I did not invite you here because of the farm. I'll be clear about that. I asked you because Evelyn needed, because I needed. He stopped. He pressed his mouth together. He tried again. I am not a man who uses people. I never have been, and I'm not about to start. I know that, Cole said. I just want it understood, Thomas. Cole's voice was steady. I know that. I'm not sitting here thinking you ran a con on me. I'm sitting here because I chose to be here. And now I'm aware of a problem. I like to think about it. That's it. That's all. Thomas looked at him. I was working the way men's jaws work when they are feeling things they have decided not to show. Well, would have liked you, he said finally. Cole didn't answer right away. The words sit where they landed. I hope so, he said. And move the way mornings, on a farm, move purposefully, with no wasted time. Thomas went back to the barn after breakfast and Cole went with him, offering before Thomas could ask, which was the only way the offer was going to work. Showed him what needed doing without making a production out of it. A kind of man who gave you a job and then left you to it. They worked side by side through the morning, not talking much. Occasionally Thomas would say something practical, that bolt's been stripped since June, force it, or the east fence took some damage in the last storm. Putting it off, and Cole would respond, and they'd work. It was, Cole realized, somewhere around 10 in the morning, the comfortable silences he'd been in since Rachel died. Remember, there was something about working next to someone. The shared language of physical work, the way two people can occupy the same space and the same purpose without needing to fill every second with noise. He and Rachel had been like that sometimes on weekends, her grading papers at the kitchen table while he worked on the bike in the garage, existing in the same space. The particular ease of not being alone. He hadn't let himself miss that specific thing in a long time. He'd been afraid that if he started, he wouldn't stop. But he was still working through that when Thomas, without looking up from what he was doing, said, you know, Michael used to work next to me like this. Cole kept his hands moving. Talking? Cole said. Without talking, Thomas said. He said he got his best thinking done when his hands were busy. Smart man. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Er. He said he learned it from me. His voice was low. I never knew if that was a compliment. Cole glanced at him. Coming from a son, that's never not a compliment. Thomas's hands went still for a moment. Just a moment. Then he picked up the wrench again. They didn't speak for another 20 minutes. But something had changed in the air between them. Something had been opened carefully. Two people who were both more comfortable with silence than with sentiment, and neither of them was going to comment on it, and both of them knew it had happened. Just before noon, Evelyn called them in from the porch. Lunch was on the table by the time they'd washed up soup and cornbread and sliced pie, out the same quiet efficiency as breakfast. All sat down and looked at the three places set at the table. Thomas's, Evelyn's, his. He noticed that the third place, Michael's place, was not set this afternoon. Only three places, not four. He felt the significance of that and didn't comment on it, and sat down and passed the cornbread. And Cole understood, in the way you sometimes understand things that aren't said, but that this was its own kind of statement, that something had shifted overnight. That the extra place at the table was for days when Thomas and Evelyn needed to remember. Okay? With Cole sitting in the third chair, they were doing something else. Or something different. He wasn't replacing Michael. He wasn't pretending to be Michael. He was just present, the way Thomas had asked him to be. Over lunch, Evelyn said, "I want to show you something this afternoon." "If you're willing." "I'm willing," Cole said. "Michael's memorial," she said, "there's in the back field. We put it in about 2 years after he passed. He built it himself." Thomas set down his spoon, looked at his soup bowl. He nodded once, slowly, as though agreeing to something he hadn't quite decided yet. "Cole to see it," Evelyn said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't a request. Thomas looked up. He met his wife's eyes. That 1-second conversation. "Right," he said. Cole nodded. "Then I'd like that." After lunch, the three of them walked across the farm. Thomas led, moving with his slow, deliberate step, the walk of a man who had crossed this same ground 10,000 times. Evelyn walked beside Cole, not speaking, the collar of her coat turned up against the October air. Memorial was in a clearing at the edge of the back field. Thomas had built a simple wooden bench facing a flat stone set in the ground. The stone had Michael's name and the dates of his life. Below that, 3 words, "He showed up." Cole stood in front of it and read those 3 words. He showed up. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He stood there and let it be what it was, the most honest summary of a life he'd ever seen on a memorial stone. Poetry. No flourish. Just the plain truth of the man. "He chose those words himself," Evelyn said quietly. His promise years before. He said, "Dad, I go. Don't put anything fancy. Just say I showed up. Only thing that matters." Cole looked at Thomas. Thomas was looking at the stone with the expression of a man who has made peace with something but is never going to be finished making peace with it. A peace that holds and breaks and holds again every day for the rest of your life. "How old was he when he said that?" Cole asked. 6, Thomas said. He'd just joined the fire department. He'd been to his first bad call, a house fire. He paused, got out. He came home that night, and he said, "I think I understand now what I'm here for, what we're all here for." He said it like he'd worked out some puzzle that had been bothering him. Thomas pressed his lips together. He was being dramatic. He was 26. He had decades to figure it out. The silence that followed was one of the heaviest Cole had ever stood in. But he had 3 more years, Thomas flatly, quiet, as if he were reading a measurement off a piece of equipment. Looked at the stone. He showed up, and then something happened that Cole had not expected and could not have prepared for. Of Rachel. Not the way he usually thought of her, in those guarded, controlled flashes that he allowed himself in small doses so the grief didn't take him sideways. Of her, fully, completely, her laugh, her voice, the way she used to sit cross-legged on the couch with a stack of papers and a pen behind her ear, the way she always smelled like coffee and whatever shampoo she'd been cycling through that month. The Thursday specials he still drove past. Roast he still couldn't eat. The ring he'd moved to his right hand because he couldn't take it all the way off. She showed up, too. Every day, to every person she loved, Rachel Anderson had showed up, had put her hand on his when he was struggling, had reorganized his tool chest because she was looking for ways to do something for him, had sat in the same room with him in comfortable silence because she understood that sometimes love doesn't need language. She had showed up, and he had spent 11 years running from that memory instead of carrying it. Something moved in Cole's chest, something large and long sealed. Put his face forward, kept his jaw tight, kept his hands in his jacket pockets where nobody could see them clench briefly and then release. Thomas was watching him. Cole didn't look at Thomas. He could feel it. You okay? Thomas said very quietly. Cole said, and then, after a beat, no. But that's all right. Thomas said nothing. He just stood there, which was exactly the right response. Oh, and it made the whole thing both easier and harder at the same time. Evelyn put her hand on Cole's arm, not speaking, just her hand resting there. The same gesture he'd seen through the diner window. Same thing he'd seen Rachel do 1,000 times to students, to strangers who were struggling in her presence. Women just know. They stood there for a while, the three of them, in front of the stone in the back field, speaking, not needing to. When they walked back to the house, Cole made a decision. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a speech. He just took out his phone as they crossed the yard, back a few steps, and called Dirtbag. I need information, he said when Dirtbag picked up. Property tax auction, Harlan County, a farm on Route 7. Thomas and Evelyn Parker. He gave what details he had, not what the number is, and who I talked to, and what the deadline is. Brief silence on the other end. On Dirtbag's voice, stripped of everything except the directness Cole had always valued in him. Serious. 9 days, Cole said. I'll call you back in an hour. One more thing, Cole said. Don't make it a big thing. Don't bring the whole chapter into it yet. Let me figure out what we're actually dealing with first. Cole. Dirtbag's voice was flat with the particular tone of a man who had known Cole Anderson for 20 years. Told me, you made it a big thing. Just be quiet about it. For now. I'm always quiet. Dirtbag. You told a parking lot full of strangers about the time I cried at a dog movie that was at a bar and they were friends. They were not friends. Me back. He hung up. He caught up with Thomas and Evelyn on the porch. Thomas was holding the door and looking at Cole with the slight narrowing of the eyes that meant he'd seen Cole on the phone and was not going to ask. Cole met his eyes. I'm making a call, Cole said. The farm. Don't argue with me. Thomas's face tightened. Tight in him, old-fashioned, deep, and you couldn't reason with, directly surfaced. Immediately, oh, I'm not asking, Cole said. I'm telling you what I'm doing. This is not charity. This is me, using a resource I have because a situation exists that I can help with. Things. Thomas's jaw was rigid. Evelyn put her hand on her husband's arm. Thomas, she said. One word, but the weight of 61 years was in it. Thomas looked at his wife. He looked at Cole. He looked away. Our work. I won't take handouts, he said. Nobody's offering one, Cole said. But I know some people. People who know how to solve problems. This is. Thomas was very still for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was rough at the edges, Cole used to say the same thing when he helped people. He looked at Cole. Not charity, it's just neighbors. Cole held his gaze. Man. Thomas let out a long breath through his nose. He went inside without another word, but he didn't argue. I called back in 43 minutes. Cole took the call on the porch, where the afternoon light was starting to angle low and golden across the yard. He listened. He asked 3 questions. He listened some more. He thanked Dirtbag and hung up. He sat with the information for a moment. It was real. The deadline was real. The auction was real. It was also solvable. Not easily, not by Cole alone. Solvable with the right people and the right plan. And 9 days to execute it. Leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the yard. Tree, the tire swing moving slightly in the late afternoon air. What about Michael Parker, 26 years old, coming home from his first bad call, sitting down with his father and saying, I think I understand now what I'm here for. Cole had been riding for 30 years, covered enough miles to have gone around the earth multiple times. Remember, he had been to dark places and come back from them. He had built a life that was, by most measures, a good one. Purposeful, connected to something larger than himself. Where in the last 11 years, he had also quietly, carefully, without ever quite deciding, that started riding away from things instead of toward them. On Thomas Parker's porch, he thought, what am I here for? And the answer came back, clear and simple and unmistakable, the way answers come back when you've finally gotten quiet enough to hear them. You're here for this. He was still sitting with that thought when the back door opened and Thomas came out and stood beside him. Looked at the yard together. You're planning something, Thomas said.
Hang on in it.
Cole said. Thomas nodded slowly. You've got that look. Michael used to get it. Before he did something he wasn't going to tell me about until after. Does it bother you? Cole asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. It used to, he said. I realized the things he didn't tell me about in advance were always the things that mattered most. He paused. Learned to trust the look. Cole glanced at him and passed between them in that moment that neither of them would have been able to describe precisely, that both of them understood completely. The kind of understanding that doesn't require explanation, kind that forms between certain people quickly on a foundation that seems like it should have taken years to build, but somehow against all logic, ordinary expectation doesn't. The afternoon was going gold now. Those were long. From inside the house, Cole could hear Evelyn moving in the kitchen, cabinet doors opening and closing, the particular rhythm of a woman preparing dinner. The sounds of a house with people in it. Thomas went back inside. Cole stayed on the porch a while longer, watching the yard go from gold to gray in the last of the October light. He took out his phone. He sent a single text to the chapter group. Explanation, just an address and a time, and 3 words that every one of his brothers would recognize as the signal for something serious. Talk. We need to talk. The responses started coming in within 2 minutes. Of his brothers, all of them, variations of the same thing. I'm there. Cole looked at Thomas and Evelyn's farmhouse, at the red rooster on the mailbox at the end of the drive, visible in the fading light, at the tires swing, at the lights coming on in the kitchen windows. He put his phone back in his pocket. He stood up. He went inside for dinner. And somewhere in the back of his mind, just below everything else, something was quietly beginning to form, not yet fully shaped, yet ready to be looked at directly. A thought, connection, a thread leading from this farm, from this family, from these 2 old people and their lost son, to something deeper inside Cole's own story that he hadn't found yet. He didn't know what it was, but he had learned in 50 years of living, just the feeling that something was coming, to trust it the way Thomas had learned to trust the look on his son's face when Michael was about to do something that mattered. That night was roast chicken and roasted potatoes and green beans that Evelyn had put up herself in August. At the kitchen table, they ate at the table, the 3 of them, with the particular ease of people who have already done the hard work of deciding to trust each other. It's told a story about a tractor repair gone wrong in 9,994 that somehow ended with a neighboring farmer's prized goat on the roof of the barn. Evelyn disputed one detail and Thomas defended it, and Cole sat between them and felt something he hadn't felt in years, like he was at a table that wanted him at it. After dinner, Cole helped clear the dishes over Evelyn's protest and Thomas's quiet approval. Evelyn made coffee, and they sat at the table for another hour. Nothing heavy, just stories, just the ordinary texture of people's lives. They're traded back and forth in the easy shorthand of people who have decided to let each other in. Cole finally said goodnight and went upstairs. He paused in the doorway of Michael's room. He looked at the desk, the bookshelf, the worn quilt. Then he walked in, went to the bookshelf, and looked at the titles. His eyes moved along the spines and stopped on a thin notebook pressed between 2 thicker books, its spine blank. Pulled it out. It wasn't a book. It was a notebook, one of those standard composition notebooks, black and white, slightly worn at the corners. He turned it over. The back, In plain handwriting, someone had written a name. Parker. Cole held the notebook. He knew he should put it back. It was private. It was not his. But something, the same thing that had kept him in this room, in this house, in the orbit of these people from the moment a trembling old man had asked an impossible question in a dark parking lot, something held his hand still. He opened the first page. It was dated 11 years ago. He read the first line. He read it twice. And then he stood very still, in the middle of Michael Parker's room, holding Michael Parker's notebook, because what he just read was not what he had expected, by any distance, not even close. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He kept reading, and the longer he read, the more the room seemed to change around him, not in any way he could see, but in the way that spaces change when you understand for the first time what has happened inside them. Outside, somewhere down the hall, he could hear Thomas and Evelyn going to bed, of the house settling. The familiar aching sounds of two people moving through the end of a day they had survived together. He sat in the quiet. He read, and with every page he turned, something inside him, something that had been locked for 11 years and buried and ridden away from on 60,000 miles of open road, moved. He didn't know yet what was on the other side of it. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. He read until 2 in the morning. The notebook had 43 pages of Michael Parker's handwriting, careful, unhurried, the writing of a man who thought before he put anything down. A journal, exactly. More like a record. Dates and names and brief notes about people Michael had helped over the years. And a private accounting that had never been intended for anyone else's eyes. Read every word. Most of it was exactly what he'd expected from everything Thomas and Evelyn had told him. Neighbors helped, fences repaired, groceries left on doorsteps, a woman in town whose furnace Cole had somehow fixed without her ever learning who had done it. Parker documented in his own hand, spending himself on other people with the quiet consistency of a man who considered it simply the correct use of a life. All turned to an entry dated 30 years ago, January 14th. The handwriting was the same but slightly younger, not as settled. The pen pressed a little harder. The entry was longer than most of the others. He read it once. Then he read it again, slower. Then he set the notebook down on his knee and sat in Michael Parker's room at 2 in the morning and felt the world rearrange itself around him in the particular silent way that the world rearranges itself when you discover that something you was coincidence was never coincidence at all. The entry described a night in January 30 years ago. A road, black ice, a car accident, a teenager, alone, trapped in a burning vehicle after sliding off the 2-lane highway 7 miles outside of Harlan County. Michael Parker, 19 years old, had been driving home from a friend's house when he came over the ridge and saw the flames. He had pulled someone out. He had never told anyone. His parents, not his friends, not the fire department he'd later join. Pulled the boy out, confirmed he was breathing, flagged down a truck on the highway, and left before anyone could ask his name. The entry ended with one line, written in plain, adorned handwriting, that was maybe 17. Wore a ring on his right hand too big for him, probably his dad's. Hope he's okay. Cole looked at his right hand. The ring, the gold band he'd worn on his right hand for 11 years, the one he'd told himself he moved for practical reasons. Father had given it to him the week before he deployed for the Gulf. Father had said, "Bring this home, son." Cole had brought it home, it on his right hand every day since 1991, long before Rachel, long before the Hells Angels, long before everything. He'd worn it so long he'd stopped seeing it. He was 17 years old that January night. He had a friend's car and lost control on the black ice coming over the ridge on the 2-lane outside Harlan County. He had been in that car. He had been the teenager. Michael Parker had pulled him out, confirmed he was breathing, flagged down help, and walked away without leaving a name. He had spent 30 years wondering who had saved him that night. He told the story twice in his life, once to Rachel on their third date, to Dirtbag on a night that involved too much whiskey and the particular honesty that comes with it. Times he described The stranger, as a young guy, strong, steady hands, didn't say much, just pulled him out and disappeared. For 30 years, Cole had carried that night as the moment everything could have ended. Someone had intervened between him and a different life, a shorter one, a finished one, without asking for anything in return. And now he was sitting in that man's bedroom. Cole sat there for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't call anyone. He just sat with the notebook in his hands and the enormity of it pressing down on him from all sides. And he breathed in and out slowly. You breathe when something is too large to absorb all at once and you have to take it in pieces. Parker had saved his life. And 30 years later, his parents had stopped a stranger in a diner parking lot and asked him to come home with them for a weekend. And the stranger had said yes. Cole pressed his thumb against the page, against Michael's handwriting, against the date and the description and the last line, "Hope he's okay." "Okay," Cole said aloud. Nobody, the room, or the man who was 8 years gone and had never once asked to be thanked. "Okay, Michael." He closed the notebook. He set it carefully on the nightstand. He lay back on the quilt and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep again for the rest of the night. The sky started to go gray. Cole had made 3 decisions. The first was that he was going to tell Thomas and Evelyn the truth. Not today, not yet. He needed to hold it for a few more hours. Needed to be sure he could say it without coming apart in a way that wouldn't serve anyone. But he was going to tell them. The second was that the farm was not going to be auctioned. He didn't have the full plan yet, but the direction was clear and his chapter was already mobilized, and Cole Anderson had never failed to execute a plan once the direction was set. Their decision was harder to name. It was less a decision and more a recognition of something he had been avoiding for 11 years, finally arriving, not crashing through the door, but standing at it quietly, waiting to be let in. He had been running. He had dressed the running in good works and purpose and brotherhood, and the noise of 60,000 miles of open road. All of it had been genuine. All of it had mattered. But underneath it, at the bottom of it, there had always been the running, deliberate, strategic, daily decision to stay in motion so the silence couldn't catch up with him. Michael Parker had never run from anything. His whole life, 32 years of it, had been a life of turning toward the fire when other people ran from it. Turning toward the neighbor with the broken fence who needed someone to show up. The stranger trapped in a burning car on a winter road at 19 years old. All had been given that life, given it specifically, deliberately, by Michael Parker's 2 bare hands in the cold January dark, and he had lived it well in many ways. But also, in one specific and significant way, he had turned away from stillness, from the quiet, from the particular bravery required to sit still in a house that was too large for one person and let yourself feel how large it was. He had needed someone to remind him how to turn back. Somehow, impossibly, the man who'd saved him 30 years ago had arranged it from the other side of 8 years of absence. All got up when he heard Thomas's boots on the stairs. He splashed water on his face, changed his shirt, and came down to find Thomas already in his coat, heading for the barn. Thomas looked at him, took in the hollows under Cole's eyes, a particular stillness of a man who hadn't slept. "You find something in that room?" Thomas asked. It was not a casual question. In the way he asked it, told Cole that Thomas had wondered for 8 years if there was something in that room that would eventually need to be found. "Yes," Cole said, "but I need to talk to both of you after breakfast. Can you give me until then?" Thomas looked at him for a long moment. "Right," he said, and went to the barn. Evelyn was already at the stove. She looked at Cole once and then looked at the stove and poured his coffee without a word. She had the particular radar of a woman who had raised a son who kept things until he was ready to say them. And she recognized the look of a man in that process. She gave him breakfast and she gave him space, and Cole was grateful for both. By 9 o'clock, the 3 of them were at the kitchen table. He had the notebook in front of him, closed. He'd brought it down from the room carefully, the way you carry something breakable. Thomas looked at the notebook. His expression shifted recognition, and underneath it something more complicated. Letter. He kept that since he was about 17, Thomas said quietly. Oh, Cole said. I read it. I want to apologize for that. I should have put it back. I'm not sorry. Because what's in it is something you need to know. I think he stopped, steadied himself. I think it's also something I needed to know. Evelyn's hands were folded on the table. She was watching his face. Cole opened the notebook to the January entry, turned it around and laid it flat in front of Thomas and Evelyn. Letters. Read the entry from January 18th, he said. 30 years ago. Thomas reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses with the automatic movement of a man who'd been doing it for 20 years. Come on. He leaned forward. He read. Cole watched his face. He watched the moment Thomas reached the last line. Watched the small, involuntary stop, the almost imperceptible pause of a man whose reading has been interrupted by something unexpected. Thomas looked up. Michael never told us about this, he said. His voice was careful, measured. I know, Cole said. Evelyn had leaned in to read over Thomas's arm. She was still reading. Cole watched her finish, watched her look up. He left before anyone could get his name, she said, quietly. That was Michael, Thomas said. Same sentence Evelyn had said at the diner. The same quiet pride underneath it, the same ache. He never wanted credit. I didn't even know he did things like this until after he passed, and people started calling us. We'd never heard of, telling us what he'd done for them. Cole put both his hands flat on the table. As he said, Evelyn. He looked at them both. I was on that road. The silence that followed was so complete that Cole could hear the clock on the kitchen wall. It went very still. Evelyn's hand came up slowly to her mouth. I was 17 years old, Cole said. His voice was eager. He'd found a place underneath the emotion, a solid flat place, and he was standing on it. January 14th. I'd borrowed a car. I hit black ice coming over the ridge on the 2-lane. Off the road. The car caught fire. He paused. The young man pulled me out. Strong, steady. He didn't say much. Like down help, and by the time I was fully conscious, he was gone. He looked at Thomas. I had been wondering for 30 years who that was, Cole said. I never found out. I told the story twice in my life because most of the time I couldn't. He stopped. Pressed forward. I couldn't talk about it without feeling like I owed a debt I had no way to pay. Thomas had taken off his glasses. He was holding them in his hand. His other hand was on the table, and it was shaking, not the slight, ordinary tremor of an old man, but the full body kind of shaking that comes from inside, from a place that has just been struck by something it could not have prepared for. It was my son, Thomas said. The words came out rough. They'd had to push through something solid to get out. It was my boy. That was your son, Cole said. Evelyn made a sound, not a word, just a sound small and sudden and full of something that had no clean name. She pressed her hand harder against her mouth. Thomas looked at his wife. Oh. Then he looked at Cole. Then he looked at the notebook, open on the table. Michael's handwriting right there, 30 years old, and still perfectly legible, still perfectly him. Saved your life, Thomas said. He saved my life, Cole said. And 30 years later, I walked into a diner in Harlan County and sat 20 feet from his parents. He let that sit for a moment. I don't know what to do with that. I don't think I'm supposed to understand it completely. I know that I'm sitting here at this table because of him, because of what he did on that road in January. I had 30 more years. A wife I loved. I had brothers I'd die for. I had a life. His voice broke slightly on the last word at the edge, and he held it. And I could not have told you until 48 hours ago, whose hands I have to thank for all of it. Thomas put his glasses on the table, covered his face with his hands. It lasted about 10 seconds. He held his hands down and pressed them flat on the table and breathed slowly and deeply. Controlled breathing of a man who has survived many hard things and is surviving this one too. There were tears on his face, and he didn't try to hide them. Then reached across the table. She put her hand over Cole's. He knew what he did that night mattered, she said. Her voice was steady, and it cost her. I could see it in how he wrote this. But he kept it with him. Her thumb moved, just slightly over Cole's knuckles, and somehow you came back to us. All this time, she shook her head slightly. In disbelief, but in something closer to awe. That's not coincidence. No, Cole said. I don't think it is either. Thomas lowered his hands. His face was wet and open, and he was not going to apologize for it. I have to understand something, Thomas said. For 8 years, I have been trying to find a reason. Some reason why a man like Michael, who spent his whole life looking after people, should be the one who he stopped. All worked. I couldn't find one. There's no clean reason. There's no answer that makes it right. He looked at Cole with the eyes of a man who has wrestled with God and not won and not quit. He gestured at the notebook, at Cole, at the space between them. This tells me that what Michael did not stop when he stopped going. It kept working in the world even after he was gone. He reached out and picked up the notebook. Hold it the way you hold something that suddenly means more than you knew it could. He saved you, Thomas said, and now you're here. He looked at Cole. Understand what that means to me? Cole held his gaze. I think I'm starting to. Thomas set the notebook down, slowly, with the effort of a large man whose body had given him decades of hard work and was presenting the bill, stood at his full height, which was still considerable. And he looked at Cole Anderson across the table with the expression of a man who has searched for something for a long time and has, against all probability, found it in the last place he thought to look. He extended his hand. Cole stood and took it. Thomas's grip was enormous and steady, and he held on for a moment longer than a handshake required. Performing emotion, just acknowledging it, just letting it be real. Thank you for telling us, Thomas said. Thank you for asking me in, Cole said. Evelyn was standing now too. She looked at both of them. Her eyes were bright, and her back was straight, and she was the most composed person in the room. Cole was beginning to understand was simply who she was, not a woman without feeling, but a woman whose feeling ran so deep it had long since stopped needing the surface to show it. All right, she said, sit back down, both of you. They sat. She poured more coffee and then, in the way that families absorb enormous things and then return to the business of living. Because the living still needs to be done, they talked. They talked. For 3 hours at that kitchen table, Cole told them everything. Not just the accident. Everything. Rachel, the ring. The Thursday specials he drove past. The 11 years of motion. The particular kind of silence that chases you when you're trying not to let it catch up. Thomas and Evelyn listened the way only certain people can listen completely, rushing to fix anything without filling every pause with consolation. They just received it, and in receiving it, they gave Cole something he hadn't known he was starving for, something of being known. Around noon, Cole's phone went off. Dirtbag, he let it ring. It went off again 30 seconds later. I'll answer it, Evelyn said. Cole picked up. I'm in the middle of something. I know, Dirtbag said. Sir, you need to hear this right now. I looked into the Parker Farm situation. I talked to 3 people in Harlan County this morning. A brief pause. Oh, there's more going on here than back taxes. Cole went still. What do you mean? There's a development company that's been acquiring land in that county for the past 2 years. Farmland. Mostly. Old family properties that have hit tax trouble. They've been, let me be careful about how I say this, they've been accelerating that trouble in some cases. Making sure certain properties hit the auction block. Another pause. Parker Farm is on their acquisition list. Cole looked at Thomas across the table. Thomas had gone very still. Watching Cole's face read the conversation. How sure are you? Cole said. Into the phone. Sure enough, Dirtbag said. Names. I've got the company. I've got 2 other families in that county who went through the same process in the last 18 months and lost their land. Cole stood up from the table to the window. He kept his voice level. What do we need to fix it? He said. For the taxes, that's the simple part. But there's also a legal angle. If we can document the pattern, we might be able to flag it with the state AG's office and stop the auction on procedural grounds. High time at minimum, maybe more. Do you know a lawyer? I know 4 lawyers, Dirtbag said. The offense of a man with an MBA from Vanderbilt. Let him do property law. I'll make calls. Do it, Cole said. Dirtbag, get the chapter together. Not a ride. Work weekend. I need hands, tools, and whatever else we can bring. I'm to be here Friday morning. Silence on the other end for a moment. All of them? Dirtbag said. Every single one, Cole said. He hung up and turned back to the table. Thomas was watching him. Evelyn was watching him. And the look on Thomas's face was the complicated look of a proud man receiving help he has decided to accept, not easily, without cost, consciously, deliberately, because some things are larger than pride, and he was old enough to know it. To this than we knew, Cole said. He sat back down, told them what Dirtbag had told him plainly, directly, softening it past what was useful. Thomas listened without interrupting. Cole finished. There was a silence. Then Thomas said, in a voice like gravel, I knew something was wrong. Ratters. When the notices started coming faster than they should, county office was suddenly very efficient about the timeline. He pressed his mouth into a hard line. I didn't have proof. I thought I was being paranoid. You weren't, Cole said. Thomas looked at his hands. Evelyn said, what do we do? We fight it, Cole said. Certain. That's what we do. He looked at both of them. Oh, my chapter is coming Friday. They'll work the property, whatever needs doing. Do it. A lawyer is going to look at the legal angle and see if we can stop the auction before it happens. Hers. He stopped. The money will handle. Ask me how right now. Just let me handle it. Thomas opened his mouth. Thomas, Cole said, your son pulled me out of a burning car, away without his name. He never asked for anything back. Cole kept his eyes level. To give something back, not to you. To him. Thomas closed his mouth. He looked at Cole Anderson across the table at the gray beard and the leather vest and the road captain's patch and the ring on the right hand that had started on a 17-year-old kid's finger 30 years ago on a winter road in January. Did all of it for a long, steady moment. Then he nodded once. Understood that from Thomas Parker, that nod was everything. Sighed. The October afternoon was moving fast, the way days move when they carry too much in them. Cole sat at that table a while longer. In the house that Michael Parker had grown up in, that Michael Parker had loved, and he felt something clarify inside him, something that had been cloudy for a long time slowly clearing. A road clears after rain. He wasn't here by accident. He had been riding toward this his whole life, even when he thought he was riding away from everything else. The man who had made that possible, who had put his hands into a burning car on a January night and pulled out a 17-year-old kid with his father's ring on his finger and then simply walked away, that man was never going to know. His parents were, and his parents would carry it forward. Cole Anderson, a captain, 50 years old, widower, a man who had spent 11 years running at 60 miles an hour from the sound of his own silence. Cole Anderson's was finally stopped, turned around. He was pointed at something now, and he wasn't looking back. Friday came fast. Cole had spent Thursday making calls, answering calls on the particular kind of logistics work that most people never saw from the outside, the behind-the-scenes maneuvering that looked effortless only because the person doing it had been doing it for 20 years and had learned, hard failures, exactly how to move pieces without making noise. Coordinated with Dirtbag on the legal angle. He had a 2-hour conversation with a property attorney named Sandra Merritt, who practiced in Knoxville and who had 40 minutes of reviewing what Dirtbag had sent her. Used the phrase predatory acquisition pattern with the flat certainty of a woman who had seen it before and knew exactly what to do with it. Coordinated pickup trucks and trailers. He made a call to a man who ran a lumber yard in Knoxville and owed Cole a favor from 2019 that Cole had never called in. Let in now. He made 2 other calls he did not tell Thomas or Evelyn about. Of it, Thomas worked his farm and Evelyn kept the house, and neither of them asked Cole for a progress report. Its own kind of trust, the particular trust of people who have decided that someone to handle something and have chosen to believe it. Thursday night, after dinner, Thomas and Cole sat on the porch again. Their thing without either of them deciding it would be the end of the day. The cold air, not always talking. How many are coming tomorrow? Thomas asked. Cole said, maybe 14. A couple of wives. Their husbands can be trusted not to embarrass them. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Your brothers, some of them, good workers? The best I know. Thomas nodded. Well, he was looking at the yard. Cole could see him doing the math, the list of things the farm needed that he hadn't been able to get to, calculating in his head the order of priority. A man who had spent his whole life managing what needed doing and how to do it with whatever he had available. I work alongside them, Thomas said. I'm not going to sit on this porch while other men fix my property. I didn't expect you to, Cole said. You're going to have to let them set the pace. Those men can work faster than you're used to, and they're going to do it their way. Thomas gave him a look that was equal parts amusement and stubbornness. Working this farm since before any of your brothers were born. I know, Cole said. Tell them that. They'll respect it, but still let them work. Thomas considered this. Ugh, he said. They sat in the quiet for another few minutes. Thomas said, without looking at Cole, I've been thinking about what you told us this morning. The accident. Cole waited. I keep thinking about that night, Thomas said. Michael coming home. I remember that night. He came in later than I expected. It was well past midnight. I was still up. I was always up when he was out. Old habit. He came in and I asked him where he'd been, and he said he'd taken the long way home. He paused. Turned it like it was nothing. The long way home. Thomas shook his head slowly. I never knew until this morning what that meant. Cole thought about a 19-year-old Michael Parker. Ian, past midnight, smelling of cold air and whatever a burning car smells like, telling his father he'd taken the long way home because he didn't want to make a thing of what he'd done. Like him, Cole said. He was always like that, Thomas said. Even as a little boy, he'd do something for someone and then deflect so fast you barely caught it. He paused. It was modesty. Now, I think it was something deeper than modesty. I think he genuinely didn't see himself as the important part of the story. Always thought the other person was the story. He was just the one who showed up, Cole said. Thomas looked at him. Yes, he said, exactly that. The night was very clear. Stars. No wind. He did that for me, Cole said quietly. But he made me the story. He walked away so I'd never know whose hands pulled me out. And somehow he stopped. Somehow, and it didn't matter until I was sitting in his room 30 years later reading about it in his own handwriting. Thomas nodded slowly. Can I tell you something, Thomas said. Yes, sir. Evelyn cried for about 2 hours this afternoon after you told us. He said it plainly. Apology in it. No discomfort. Not sad crying. Something else. She said it felt like he reached back and touched us. Like he set all of this in motion from wherever he is, and then sat back and waited for it to arrive. Thomas looked at Cole. Believes that. Completely. What do you believe? Cole asked. It was quiet for a long moment. I believe that a good man's work does not stop when he stops, Thomas said. I don't know how the mechanics of that work. I'm not a man who claims to understand the theology. I have watched it happen twice, now once, with all the people who called us after he passed. Now with you, his kindness kept moving after he was gone. He paused. I believe that. Whatever else I believe or don't believe that. Cole didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just sat with it. They went inside at 10. Cole lay in Michael's room with the notebook on the nightstand and did not open it again. He didn't need to. He had what he needed from it. He put the light out, and in the darkness he said something he hadn't in 11 years, not a formal prayer, anything organized, just words addressed at the ceiling in the general direction of whatever or whoever might be listening. Thank you. For 30 years. For the farm. Or for these two people. Thank you. He slept soundly until 4:30. Thomas's boots hit the floorboards, and the third step creaked, and the sound of the cast iron pan came up through the old house like a heartbeat. It arrived at 7:15 Friday morning. 3 trucks and 2 vans, 12 men and 2 women, trailers loaded with tools, lumber, materials, enough food to feed a small army for a weekend. They came quietly, no revving engines, no theater. Had told them to come ready to work, and that was what they did. Airbag drove the lead truck. He was a compact, dark-haired man who looked nothing like what his name suggested. Always been the point. He got out and walked straight to Cole, and they clasped hands, and Dirtbag looked around the property with the quick, efficient gaze of a man assessing a situation. Good land, Dirtbag said. Callers. Good people, Cole said. Where do you want us? Cole gave him the list he'd worked out with Thomas the night before. Dirtbag nodded through it, asked two clarifying questions, and turned to the group and started directing with the quiet authority of a man who could organize chaos in his sleep. Came out of the barn and stopped when he saw the group assembling in his yard. He stood still for a moment, taking it in 12 strangers in leather and work gear, loading lumber and tools, moving with purpose across land that wasn't theirs in order to save it for someone they'd never met until this morning. Stood there for a long moment. Then he walked directly to Dirtbag, held his hand, and said, Thomas Parker, what do you need me to do? Dirtbag shook his hand. Honored if you'd show us where to start. It was the exactly right thing to say, and Cole saw Thomas's shoulders drop about half an inch in relief. The day was loud with work. The particular noise of a property coming back to life, hammer strikes, or tools, men calling to each other across distances, of lumber being stacked and shifted, the creak of the barn as its old bones were reinforced. Thomas moved from crew to crew with the energy of a man 15 years younger, instructing, occasionally taking a tool from someone's hands to demonstrate and then handing it back. He was in his element. Cole watched him from across the yard at one point and thought, this is where he's most himself. This is the version of Thomas Parker that Michael grew up watching. Evelyn fed everyone. She had started cooking before 7, and she did not stop. She moved between the kitchen and the yard with a steady efficiency that quietly stopped every one of Cole's brothers in his tracks, one at a time, in the rotation of the day, each of them coming up to the porch for water or coffee and finding Evelyn there, asking their name, handing them something to eat, sending them back with more energy than they'd come with. Mid-afternoon, Cole could see it happening, the shift in how his brothers related to her. They stopped treating her like an elderly woman they were helping and started treating her like someone whose yard they happened to be working in. That was the energy she projected. Easy, natural. She'd been feeding this particular group of people for years. At noon, Sandra Merritt called. Cole stepped away from the work to take it. A motion this morning, Sandra said, to halt the auction pending investigation of the acquisition pattern. Holloway's clerk already called me back. She said the judge wants to see the documentation by Monday morning. Is that good? Cole asked. It means he's taking it seriously, Sandra said. Cole, I sent him is solid. 2 other families lost their land to this company in the last 18 months. The timeline on the Parker property is irregular in ways that are hard to explain innocently. If the judge grants the halt, you're looking at weeks, maybe months, before anything moves. Time to fight this properly. What do you need from me? Statements from Thomas and Evelyn about the timeline of notices and any contact they had with anyone from the county office or the development company directly. Or dates if they have them. I'll get them tonight, Cole said. The taxes themselves. Even if we halt the auction, underlying debt is still real. That still needs to be addressed. I know, Cole said. That's being handled separately. Brief pause. How separately vary? Cole said. All right, Sandra said, in the voice of a woman who has learned when to ask follow-up questions and when to let something be handled. Tell me Sunday. Cole put his phone away and went back to work. He didn't know what Thomas and Evelyn didn't know yet was what had happened Thursday afternoon when Cole had made the 2 calls he hadn't told anyone about. The first call had been to a veterans organization that Cole had worked with for 6 years through the charity rides. He'd told them Michael Parker's story, the fire department, tremors, the free work, and the burning car in January 30 years ago. The man on the other end of the line had listened without interrupting. A firefighter who served his community his whole life, the man had said, his parents are losing the farm. In 9 days, Cole had said, "Here we stop it. Send me the details," the man had said. The call had been to a journalist. Cole trusted a woman named Pat Crenshaw, who worked for a paper in Knoxville and who had covered the charity rides for 3 years and who had never once misrepresented a story Cole had given her access to. "I have something for you," Cole had said, "but I need you to do it right. Have it, people. I need your word." "You have it," Pat had said. "They're everything." Michael's story, the accident 30 years ago, and the farm, development company, and the predatory acquisition pattern. Hell's Angels chapter, showing up with lumber and lawyers. Crenshaw had been very quiet for a moment. Then she'd said, "Oh, this is the best story I've had in 5 years." "I know," he'd said. "Get right. When do you want it to run?" "Sunday morning," he'd said. The week starts. Before anyone can react, Cole had understood what his 20 years of road captain experience had taught him about how things actually worked in small counties in Tennessee was that money solved the financial problem and lawyers solved the legal problem. Neither of those things was the full solution. The full solution required changing the landscape of the situation entirely. The Booth Parker farm, famous enough, and Michael Parker's story known enough, any attempt to push that auction forward would carry a cost that no development company wanted to pay publicly. Sunlight was the best disinfectant. Pat Crenshaw was his sunlight. 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, the east fence was fully repaired. The barn had new structural supports on 2 walls and a patched roof section. Carl's memorial in the backfield had been cleaned, stone reset level, and a simple wooden rail fence placed around it, not ornate, overwrought, just clean and solid and respectful. The garden had been cleared of the overgrowth of a season that Thomas hadn't had the time or energy to manage alone. 4 o'clock, something happened that Cole hadn't planned. One of his brothers, a large man named Garrett, who had barely spoken 40 words the entire day, was walking back from the memorial area when he stopped. He stood at the stone for a moment. Cole watched from across the yard, sure what he was seeing. Garrett reached into his pocket, pulled out a small American flag, the kind they sell at hardware stores, small stick flags. He had apparently brought it without telling anyone. He pressed it into the ground beside Michael Parker's memorial stone, straightened it, stood up. He stood with his head bowed for a moment. Then he walked back toward the barn. Cole caught him as he came around the corner. The big man looked at him. His face was its usual composition, reserved, private, giving nothing away easily. "Vietnam," Garrett said. "He was a firefighter, too. After he came home." Cole nodded. "He didn't say anything." "He showed up," Garrett said. "Well, any of us can do." He went back to work. Cole stood where he was for a moment. He thought about what Thomas had said the night before: a good man's work does not stop when he stops. Across the yard, at his brothers at Dirtbag, arguing cheerfully with Thomas about the correct way to set a fence post. At 2 of his younger brothers, letting Evelyn show them how she wanted the garden edging done because she had opinions about it, and they had enough sense to defer to them. There, Garrett with his head down and his hands moving steadily over whatever he'd picked up next. Parker had saved a 17-year-old kid on a winter road, and now, 30 years later, 12 men were fixing his parents' fence. That was how it worked. That was the actual math of it. One act of kindness traveling forward through time, splitting the other acts, each one traveling further, each one generating its own momentum. You could not trace all the lines. You could not predict where they would go, but they went. They kept going. Cole had understood this intellectually for years. He'd built his charity work on a version of it, but he had never felt it in his body the way he felt it standing in Thomas Parker's yard on that Friday afternoon in October. Now, at 5:30, the work crews knocked off. Evelyn had set up a long table on the porch with food enough for twice the number of people present, and nobody needed to be asked twice. Cole's brothers filled plates and spread across the yard and the porch steps and the old oak tree's root system in the way that groups of men spread when the work is done and the eating starts comfortable, loose, the particular ease of people who have spent the day in shared purpose. Sat on the porch steps with Dirtbag and talked for 45 minutes. Cole watched them from across the yard. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the rhythm of it. Thomas asking something, Dirtbag answering, Thomas nodding, asking something else. Just interested exchange of 2 men who respected each other's competence. At one point, Thomas laughed a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, laugh of a man who had been given back something he hadn't known he'd lost. Paul looked away. He needed a moment. He walked to the edge of the yard. As he stood by the old oak, he put hhis hand on the bark. About Rachel, about what she would have made of all this, the farm, couple, the notebooks, the 30-year-old debt finally made visible. About what she would have said, specifically in the way she had of cutting through everything else to the center. Cole. She would have said, Cole, you found your way home, not to Tennessee, not to this farm, home in the sense she'd always meant it back to himself. The part of him that turned toward things instead of away from them, that had gotten lost somewhere in the middle of grief and motion and 60,000 miles of deliberate noise. He pressed his thumb against the bark of the oak tree. Hold it, he thought. Finally, Dirtbag appeared beside him. This was Dirtbag's particular skill, the ability to materialize next to you without you hearing him coming, which was disconcerting in a large man. He's remarkable, Dirtbag said. Yes, he is, Cole said. She's something else entirely, Dirtbag said. Her, meaning Evelyn, a beat. She already knows all of our names. Every single one. She used them correctly while serving food. Watched her. 60 years of teaching elementary school, Cole said. That explains it, Dirtbag said. Also, she told me my brisket technique is wrong and drew me a diagram on a napkin. Cole almost smiled. What? Devastatingly, Dirtbag said. Brief pause. Cole, what's happening Sunday? You've got that look again. Pat Crenshaw's story runs Sunday morning. Dirtbag absorbed this, the journalist. Yes. And you think that changes things? I think it changes the temperature of the situation, Cole said. Right now, the development company is operating quietly because that's how this kind of thing works best in the dark, bureaucratic speed before anyone notices. Pat's story makes noise. It makes the Parker farm a name people know. It makes any further action against it expensive in a way that has nothing to do with money. Dirtbag was quiet for a moment. This Sunday morning, Cole said. The Veterans Organization is hosting an emergency fundraiser Friday night tonight. Online. Pat's running the story simultaneously by Sunday morning. We should have more than what's needed. Dirtbag looked at him. All of this up in 2 days, he said. Michael Parker set it up 30 years ago, Cole said. I just made the calls. Saturday, Sandra Merritt called at 8 in the morning. Holloway granted the halt, she said, and there was controlled excitement underneath her professional tone. Action is suspended pending investigation. Cole, this is significant. This is not a small procedural delay. This is a judge looking at what I sent him and deciding something looks wrong enough to stop the clock. Cole was standing in the kitchen. Thomas was at the table. He'd heard the phone ring and come in from the barn because he had the instinct of a man who had been waiting for news and was not going to pretend otherwise. Cole put the call on speaker. He looked at Thomas as Sandra said it again. Action was halted. The farm was not going anywhere. Monday. Not until this was fully examined and resolved. Sat down. He sat down the way a man sits down when his legs have made the decision, before his mind caught up suddenly, completely, in the chair closest to him. He put both hands on the table, stared at the surface of it. Evelyn came in from the hallway, from wherever she was. She looked at Thomas. Oh. Cole nodded. Evelyn pressed both hands flat against the door frame, closed her eyes. Thank you, Sandra, Cole said into the phone. Thank me yet, Sandra said. This is halted, resolved. There's still work to do. But for now, yes. Farm is safe. He ended the call. The three of them were in the kitchen. His hands were still flat on the table. Evelyn had opened her eyes and was looking at her husband. Silence was the kind that has too much in it for anyone to know where to start. Said without looking up, Michael used to say that the hardest thing wasn't doing the right thing. It was letting other people do it for you when your turn came. He looked up at Cole. Understand now what he meant, Thomas said. His voice was steady. Eyes were not. And he didn't look away, and he didn't apologize for it. Cole sat down across from him. You let us in, Cole said. All you had to do. The rest was already set up. Thomas shook his head slightly. Heard this? No, Cole said. Michael did this 40 years ago on a road in January. We're just the people who got to finish it. The morning paper hit doorsteps across Knoxville and Harlan County on Sunday at 6 a.m. Pat Crenshaw's story ran above the fold, which in the modern newspaper context meant it was the lead story online from midnight Saturday. By 6 Sunday morning, it had been shared 4,000 times. By 9, it was 11,000. By noon on Sunday, bells had stopped ringing because it never actually stopped between rings. Veterans Organization's fundraiser, which had gone live Friday night alongside the online version of the story, had exceeded the tax debt total by Saturday afternoon and kept going through the weekend. Messages came in from people Cole didn't know, from people who had known Michael Parker and hadn't where to direct what they felt for years. Firefighters across the state who saw one of their own being honored, old people who had lost family farms and saw the Parker story as a proxy for their own grief, and people who had never heard of Michael Parker but read the story and felt something real move through them. Thomas and Evelyn read the story at the kitchen table Sunday morning with their coffee. Cole sat with them. Nobody spoke while they read. When they finished, set the paper down. He would have hated this, she said. Cole looked at her. The attention, she clarified. A small pause, but he would have been glad about the result. That's Michael, exactly, Thomas said. He folded the paper carefully, the way men fold newspapers when they intend to keep them. Sunday afternoon, people started arriving at the farm. Cole's brothers, they came back too, finishing up the last of the work, but others, neighbors, people from the county who had read the story. A man who had been a student in Evelyn's class in 987 and driven 40 minutes because he'd seen her name in the paper. 2 firefighters from Michael's old station in their company t-shirts pulling into the drive with a truck full of lumber that hadn't been on anyone's list. An older woman arrived alone and parked at the end of the drive and sat in her car for a while before getting out. She walked to the porch and asked for Evelyn. When Evelyn came out, the woman said she had lived 2 counties over and that her husband had been the man in the truck that Michael Parker had flagged down on the road in January 30 years ago. Her husband had talked about that night until the day he died. Always wanted to find the young man who'd flagged him down and never been able to, and she'd seen the paper this morning and had to come. Evelyn held that woman's hands on the porch for a long time. Paul watched from the yard. He thought, there it is. Thing Thomas said, the work that doesn't stop. This woman had driven from 2 counties away because of something Michael Parker had done on a dark road 30 years ago. Because of the chain of it, one action forward through time, multiplying, arriving here on a Sunday afternoon in October at a farm that was this weekend, not going anywhere. Garrett was nailing down the last section of east fence when he saw the woman on the porch. He stopped. He watched for a moment. Then he went back to work without saying anything. The set of his shoulders had changed slightly. By 4 in the afternoon, the yard had somewhere between 30 and 40 people in it. Crowd exactly. No one had organized this. No one had sent invitations. People had simply shown up because the story had moved them, and they didn't know what else to do with that movement except bring it somewhere physical. Thomas stood in the middle of his yard and looked around at all of it. Cole came and stood beside him. Thomas was very still for a moment. He looked at the fence his son had grown up climbing, and his son had worked in. The oak tree with the tire swing, memorial stone in the back field, visible from here, there's small flag beside it. He looked at 30-some people who had come because Michael's name had been spoken aloud and they had needed to be near it. Yes, Thomas said, very quietly. I see it, Cole said. What he left, Thomas said. Not the land, the barn, this. He gestured at the people, at the motion and the presence and the living weight of 30 relationships that Michael Parker had touched in the course of one ordinary, extraordinary life. This is what he left. Cole felt the truth of it the way you feel something that has been true for a long time and is only now being said. Left you too, Thomas said. He turned and looked at Cole directly. Whatever you think brought you to that diner, Tuesday night road fatigue, habit, I think you were supposed to be there. Cole met his eyes. I think so too, he said. Thomas put his hand on Cole's shoulder. Hard, steady hand of a man who had spent his life building and fixing and maintaining. Rested there for a moment. heavy and certain. Stay for dinner, Thomas said. It was not quite a question and not quite a command. But it was the thing in between those two things, the offer that knows. It is also a wish by a man who has learned this weekend to say the wishes out loud. Paul looked at the yard full of people, at Evelyn moving through them the way she moved, through everything with purpose, with the quiet authority of a woman who has spent her whole life making sure people around her felt seen. He looked at Dirtbag, attempting to explain something to two firefighters and apparently losing the argument. I looked at Garrett, finished with the fence now, standing near the oak tree with a plate of food and his face turned toward the sun. I looked at this family, this impossible, accidental, family, assembled in a yard in Harlan County, Tennessee, around the memory of a man who had spent his whole life walking toward things that needed him, said. He looked at Thomas. I'll stay for dinner. Dinner that Sunday night was the loudest the Parker farmhouse had been in 8 years. Ellen didn't plan it that way. Nobody did. But somewhere between 4 in the afternoon and 6 in the evening, 30-some people in the yard had simply stayed the way people stay when they don't want to break something that is working. By the time the sun was going down, there were folding tables set up in the yard and food appearing from 3 different directions. Evelyn's kitchen, a neighbor's truck bed, and a cooler that 2 of Cole's brothers had apparently been guarding since Friday with the dedication of men who understood that a working group needed feeding, sat at the head of the long table, not because anyone put him there. He just moved to that chair, naturally, the way a man moves to the center of the space he belongs to. Everyone else arranged themselves around it without thinking about it. Cole sat to his left. Evelyn sat to his right. The firefighters from Michael's old station sat across from each other halfway down the table and talked with Dirtbag about something that made all 3 of them laugh twice in 5 minutes. Garrett was at the far end, was eating steadily, listening more than he spoke, occasionally making a single dry observation that made the people around him stop and then laugh. From 2 counties over the one whose husband had been the truck driver on the January road sat beside Evelyn, and the 2 of them talked in the low, chained way of women who have found each other unexpectedly and recognized something. Watched all of it. He thought about the diner on Tuesday night. 5 days ago, he'd walked in for coffee and walked out with a question he couldn't answer and a choice he didn't fully understand. And now here he was at a table of 40 people that shouldn't exist, or that had no logical reason to exist, held together by the life one man had lived and the ripples it had sent forward through time. Caught him looking. You're doing it again, Thomas said. What? Thinking instead of eating. Thomas pointed at his plate. Oh, 8. After a while, Thomas said quietly, not for anyone else's ears, just for Cole's, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no. Ask, Cole said. Thomas looked at his plate for a moment, organizing his words the way he organized everything methodically. Our waste. When this weekend is over, he said, when you ride back to Knoxville and go back to your chapter and your work and your life, I want you to know that you are welcome here. As a guest, not as someone who helped us out of a problem. He paused. His family, Cole was very still. I know that's a large word, Thomas said. Don't use it lightly. I am not a man who uses words lightly. He looked up. Colin and I talked last night for a long time, and we both said the same thing independently before we said it to each other. He held Cole's gaze. Come along at this table. The noise of 40 people continued around them. Everywhere, laughter, overlapping conversation. And inside all of it, this small, enormous moment, Cole looked at Thomas Parker at the silver hair, face, the steady dark eyes that had been steady through more loss than most men, survived intact and felt something move through him that he did not try to name or contain. Like that, Cole said. His voice was lower than he intended. Like that very much. Thomas nodded once, firmly. The way a man signs a document that matters. Good, he said, and went back to eating. Cole stared at his plate for a moment. He pressed his lips together. He breathed in through his nose and out slowly. Dirtbag called something down the table to him, and Cole looked up and answered, and the evening continued. Something had shifted, something had been decided, and both men felt it, and neither of them needed to say another word about it. Us left gradually, the way they'd come in ones and twos, hoping to find Thomas or Evelyn before they went. Saying things that Cole could see landing on the old couple, like weight and light at the same time. Meaningful and heavy and warm. The firefighters were among the last to leave. The older one, a man about 50, named Carl, who had joined the station the year before Michael died and had therefore barely known him, stopped in front of Thomas before he left. He's the reason I stayed in the department, Carl said, after my first bad year. Someone told me about him, and I thought if he could do it the way he did, then I could find a way to do it too. He paused. I've been doing it for 7 years because of a man I barely met. Thomas shook his hand with both of his. Thank you for telling me, Thomas said. Carl nodded. He looked like he had more he wanted to say and couldn't find the shape of it. He just nodded again and left. Cole watched the taillights going down the gravel drive. By 8:30, it was just Thomas, Evelyn, Cole, and Dirtbag, who had never once in 20 years of brotherhood required an explicit invitation to make himself useful, already carrying dishes inside with the efficacy of a man who had made himself at home without asking permission. As Cole reflected, both his most irritating and most valuable quality. It doesn't stop moving, Evelyn observed, watching Dirtbag through the kitchen window. He has an MBA from Vanderbilt, Cole said. He channels it into productivity. Evelyn looked at Cole, proud of him. Don't tell him that, Cole said. Impossible. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had watched men pretend not to care about each other for 60 years and found it consistently, affectionately transparent. The four of them had coffee at the kitchen table around 9. Thomas was tired. Cole could see it in him. The exhaustion of a man who had carried an enormous amount of weight for an enormous amount of time and had, over the course of one weekend, been allowed to set some of it down. He was still upright, still present. Lines in his face were deeper, and his movements were slower, and his eyes, when he was not actively engaged in conversation, went somewhere internal. Greg excused himself early, taking the guest room Cole had found for him in the neighbor's spare space, another arrangement Cole had made without announcing it. Dirtbag paused in the kitchen doorway and looked at Thomas. Mr. Parker, he said, I want you to know what you have here. This farm, these people, what your son built. He stopped. Again, there aren't many things in this world that are what they're supposed to be. This, he nodded. Good night. Thomas looked at him for a moment. Night, son, he said. The word came out naturally. Ceremony, the way Thomas Parker said everything. And Dirtbag, who had an MBA from Vanderbilt and had not been called son by anyone in 30 years, in the hallway with his face turned slightly away from the room. Cole pretended not to notice. So did Evelyn. Thomas didn't notice because he had already meant it simply, plainly, the way you mean a word when it's just true. The three of them sat in the quiet that followed. It was a different quiet now than it had been on Tuesday night when Cole first walked into this house. It had been the quiet of a space holding too much absence. There was something else, fuller, softer, the quiet of a space that had been inhabited fully and was resting from it. Evelyn put her hands around her coffee mug. I want to say something, she said, and I want to say it while it's the three of us, because I mean it for the three of us. Cole and Thomas both looked at her. Evelyn was not a woman who made preambles. When she said she wanted to say something, already organized it completely. She looked at Cole first, at Thomas, then at the table between them, as if she were addressing the space they shared together. 8 years ago, she said, when we lost Michael, I made a decision. I decided that I was not going to let grief make me smaller. I've watched it do that to people. I've seen people lose someone and let the loss define the boundaries of everything that came after everything within those boundaries, acceptable, everything outside them a threat. She paused. I decided that was not going to be me. That was not going to be us. She looked at Thomas. We kept his room ready. We kept his place at the table. Because we were stuck. Because we refused to let the boundary be drawn there. The door opened. She looked back at Cole, and you walked through it. Cole held her gaze. Well, I was headed home, he said. I stopped for coffee. I know, Evelyn said. It works. It never announces itself. She paused. Never announced himself either. He just showed up. The clock on the kitchen wall moved through its seconds. Up, Evelyn said to Cole, simply, completely. Cole looked down at his coffee mug. He looked at the ring on his right hand. About Rachel reorganizing his tool chest, Thursdays and pot roast, about 11 years of careful motion, and the silence he'd been trying not to let catch up with him. Here, in this kitchen, at this table. And it turned out, the silence wasn't what he'd been afraid it was. Then the sound of everything lost. It was the sound of everything waiting. I tell you something, Cole said. Always, Evelyn said. Left Knoxville Tuesday morning. Cole said, almost didn't come on the ride. He stopped. Searched for the honest word. I had a bad morning. A morning where the house is too quiet and you stand in the kitchen too long and you think about all the ways your life turned out smaller than you planned. He looked at the table, almost called dirtbag, and said I was sitting it out. Almost stayed home. He paused. Something made me go. You know what? Habit, maybe. Obligation. I wasn't even sure I wanted to be on the road that day. He looked up. I had stayed home. He said, I wouldn't have been in that diner. I wouldn't have seen the 3 plates. I wouldn't have been in the parking lot when Thomas came out. The silence held. What pulled you out of a burning car? Evelyn said quietly. 30 years later, something pulled you out of your house on a morning when you nearly didn't go. She tilted her head slightly. I don't think that's coincidence either. Cole had nothing to argue with that. He didn't try. Thomas, who had been very still through all of this, Cole and Evelyn both looked at him. Thomas pushed back from the table and left the kitchen. Them go down the hallway, heard the workshop door open, heard the particular sound of someone who knows exactly where something is and goes directly to it. He came back 2 minutes later. He was holding a pair of work gloves, the leather soft and dark from years of use, the stitching on the left thumb repaired once with a slightly different thread brown instead of tan, as whoever had repaired them had grabbed what was available and not thought about matching. The gloves still had a faint chalk line across the palm from some measurement taken and never fully washed off. Thomas set them on the table between himself and Cole. These were Michael's, he said. He wore them every day he worked on this farm. Every repair, every fence, every project, he looked at them, kept them in the workshop. Since he passed, I take them out sometimes when I'm out there. I set them on the bench. He paused. I don't put them on. Mine to wear. Cole looked at the gloves. I want you to have them, Thomas said. The kitchen was very quiet. Cole started. Listen to me, Thomas said, urgently, but with the firmness of a man who has made a decision and is not going to have it argued with. To a man who built things, not just fences and barns. He built people. He put his hands into situations that were falling apart, and he held them together until they could hold themselves. He looked at Cole. You did that this weekend. For us, yes. But I've watched you with your brothers too. Watched how they follow you. Not because you tell them to, because you've built something in them worth following. He pushed the gloves an inch closer to Cole. They belong in your hands. Cole looked at the gloves for a long moment. About Michael Parker at 19 years old, pressing his hands into a burning car without hesitating. About those same hands, years later, on his neighbor's fences, throwed tools on whatever needed fixing at whatever hour it needed fixing. About his own hands, the things they'd built, but the things they hadn't. The years he'd spent keeping them busy so he wouldn't have to hold anything still. He reached out, he picked up the gloves. They were lighter than he expected. Heavy objects, just leather and thread and a chalk line and a repaired thumb. The weight of what they represented pressed through his palms and into his chest and stayed there. Thank you, he said. It was not sufficient. There were no sufficient words. Anyway, because it was true, and true was what he had. Thomas nodded. He sat back. Something in him had completed. You could see it. The way you see something complete in a person who has been building toward a moment and has arrived at it. Evelyn reached over, and put her hand on Cole's arm. Take care of them, she said. Not a question, Cole said. I will. He held the gloves in both hands for another moment. Then he folded them carefully and placed them inside his vest, against his chest, the same place road captains carry the things that matter most. Close to his heart, they sat together until almost 11. Nobody looked at the clock. Nobody suggested calling it a night. About Michael, Rachel, about 61 years of marriage, and what made it work and what nearly broke it, golf and the long road home from it, about elementary school teaching and what it meant to shape a child's first understanding of the world, the farm in summer, when the light came through the trees at a particular angle in the late afternoon, all the ordinary things that turn out in the reckoning to be the ones that mattered most. When Cole finally said goodnight, Evelyn walked him to the bottom of the stairs. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him at the diner, with those clear blue eyes that saw all the years behind a person's face. Never replace our son, she said. Cole lowered his eyes. Then she continued, and this was the sentence he would carry for the rest of his life. The one he would hear in his quietest moments, the one that would come back to him in the dark of the Knoxville house when the silence pressed in and he needed something solid to hold on to. It reminded us, she said, that our family was never truly gone. Cole stood at the bottom of the stairs in Michael Parker's house and felt the truth of that move through him, the way something moves through you when it's not just landing on the surface, but going all the way down, finding the deepest place and settling there. Good night, Ellen, he said. She patted his arm once. Then she went down the hall to where Thomas was waiting. Cole went upstairs. He stood in the doorway of Michael's room for a moment. The bookshelf, the desk, the notebook on the nightstand where he'd left it, the ordinary components of an extraordinary life. He walked to the nightstand. There, he picked up the notebook. He carried it to the desk and set it in the center of it, neatly, squarely, the way you place something that should be found. About it for a moment, then opened it to the January entry he'd read in the small hours of Friday morning that had rearranged his understanding of his own life. He took the pen from the desk. He turned to the first blank page after Michael's last entry. Wrote the date. Today's date, Sunday in October, 30 years and 9 months after a winter night on a dark road. He wrote one line. He closed the notebook. He lay down on the quilt and was asleep within minutes. And this time he slept all the way through to morning without waking once. What he'd written in the notebook was this: I found you. Finding me first. He'd gotten down at 6 to find Thomas already back from the barn, and Evelyn already at the stove, and the coffee already poured, and his seat at the table already occupied by a plate of eggs and toast that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. Because Evelyn Parker had a sixth sense for when people were about to appear in her kitchen and prepared accordingly. He sat, he ate. The three of them were quiet in the easy way of people who have said what needed saying and don't need to fill the silence with anything else. At 7, Cole carried his bag to the bike. Thomas and Evelyn came out to the porch, strapped the bag down. He checked the bike the way he always checked it, methodical. So, out of habit, he pulled on his gloves. He put on his helmet, turned around. Thomas came down the porch steps to Cole, and he put out his hand, and Cole took it, and Thomas held on the way he had it in the kitchen. When Cole first told them the truth, longer than a handshake required, because this was not a handshake. This was a man who had held his son's hand for the last time 8 years ago and knew exactly what it meant to hold on. I'd safe, Thomas said. I will, Cole said. Back, Thomas said. Not you're welcome anytime. Don't be a stranger. You come back. Direct, certain. The statement of a man who has decided something and is not softening it with courtesy. I'll be back before the end of the month, Cole said. Thomas released his hand. He stepped back. He stood straight, chin up, his hands at his sides, the posture of a man who does not crumble in public and never has. Anne came down the steps. She walked to Cole and she hugged him. She was smaller than she appeared when she was moving through a room. She was also, Cole discovered, considerably stronger than she looked. On for a moment with the grip of a woman who meant it. Cole hugged her back. He felt the whole weekend in that embrace the diner, parking lot, the quilt, the notebook, a memorial stone, of a table full of 40 people, Sunday's dinner, coffee at 11 at night, all of it compressed into the simple physical fact of two people holding on. Back, she looked at him. Michael would have liked you very much, she said. I would have liked him, too, Cole said. She nodded, satisfied. As though that settled something she'd been checking. Cole put on his helmet. He started the bike. He felt the engine find its rhythm under him familiar, certain the heartbeat he'd been riding to the sound of for 30 years. He looked at Thomas and Evelyn on the gravel drive. They're together the way they stood everywhere, close, without touching, and without effort. 61 years of marriage, visible in the simple fact of how they occupied the same space. Lifted one hand. They lifted theirs. He rode down the gravel drive, past the red rooster on the mailbox still there. Still standing guard, still as certain about its position as it had been. In 1978 and onto Route 7 heading south. He did not look back, not because he was leaving, but because he was coming back, and you don't look back at places you're coming back to. Opened in front of him, and Cole Anderson rode. The way he always rode well and fast and with the particular attention of a man who loves the road and respects it. Thing was different in how it felt. The motion that had always been an escape was something else now. An escape, a passage, a movement between places that both held him, rather than a movement away from a place that held too much. He was going home to Knoxville, and he was already home. Both of these things were true simultaneously, and Cole held them both without needing to resolve the contradiction. Some truths are not contradictions. They are just large enough to contain more than one thing at once. He had been riding for 20 minutes when his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Buzz. He'd check it at the next stop. At the gas station 40 miles down Route 7, he pulled in and looked at the screen. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. Tennessee area code, short message, Mr. Anderson. My name is James Whitfield. I'm a reporter with the Associated Press. Pat Crenshaw's story about the Parker farm has been picked up nationally. I'd like to speak with you about Michael Parker and the Hells Angels chapter. At your convenience. Cole stared at the message. He put the phone back in his pocket. He went inside and bought a coffee and stood at the counter and thought about it. He had gone national. Michael Parker's, the name that man had spent his whole life trying to keep off the front of things, in credit, walking away before anyone could ask who he was now being spoken by people across the country. People who had never met him, never driven his roads, never lived in Harlan County. Cole thought about that for a moment, about what Evelyn had said. He would have hated the attention, but he would have been glad about the result. The result was that the farm was safe. The result was that the farm was safe. The result was that Thomas and Evelyn Parker were not going to spend their final years being displaced by a development company from a land that contained their son's memorial stone. The Carl the firefighter had a name to give to the story he'd carried for 7 years about why he stayed in the department. Was that a woman from 2 counties over had finally been able to close a loop that her husband had never been able to close. So the result was Cole Anderson, standing at a gas station counter 40 miles from the Parker farm with a pair of work gloves folded against his chest, knowing exactly where he was going and why for the first time in 11 years. He could live with Michael Parker's name being in the news. Parker could have lived with it too for the sake of what it protected. He paid. He went back outside. James Whitfield from the AP. He talked for 20 minutes. He was direct and careful, said what he wanted said, and declined what he didn't want published. And Whitfield was professional enough to respect the lines. Talked about Michael the way Thomas talked about Michael, not as a hero, as a symbol, but as a man. A specific man with specific qualities, who had made specific choices, and whose choices had kept moving through the world long after he had stopped. About Thomas and Evelyn. He talked about the chapter, talked briefly about the January road. He didn't dramatize it. He said what happened. He said what he now knew. He let the fact of it stand on its own because the fact of it was enough. When Whitfield asked him how he felt about discovering that the man who'd saved his life 30 years ago was the son of the couple who had asked a stranger in a parking lot to come home for the weekend, Paul was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think some things are larger than coincidence and smaller than miracles. I think they're just the way a good man's life keeps working in the world after he's gone. I think Michael Parker built something that I walked into 30 years ago and kept walking into until I found my way back to where it started." He paused. "I don't know what you call that. I just know it's real." Whitfield didn't say anything for a moment. Like, "Can I use that?" "Yes," Cole said. He hung up. He stood in the gas station parking lot with his hand on the phone about the story going national. He thought about all the people who would read it and feel something, the tug of recognition, particular ache that comes from a story that is both completely specific to one set of people and completely universal at the same time. About the people who would read it and call their parents. People who would read it and decide to show up somewhere they'd been putting off. The people who would read it and simply sit with it for a while, whatever room they were in, and let it remind them of something important. About one specific person who would read it. Somewhere out there was someone whose life Michael Parker had touched in a way they didn't know was Michael. Cole hadn't known. The neighbor whose furnace was mysteriously fixed. The kid who'd had someone show up for them at the right moment and had built their whole sense of what was possible on that foundation. The person in the burning car, metaphorical or literal, whose name was in no notebook, whose story had no thread leading back to Harlan County. Parker's kindness was still out there, still working, still moving through the world in ways no one could fully map. Put the phone back in his pocket. He put on his helmet. The bike, he rode home. That evening, he made 2 phone calls from his Knoxville house. First was to Dirtbag, a short practical conversation about the chapter's schedule and the follow-up work that Sandra Merritt still needed. The call took longer to make. He sat on the couch for several minutes before he dialed. His sister in Memphis. They hadn't spoken in 8 months. From any argument or falling out, just from the slow, mutual drifting that happens when 2 people are each busy surviving their own lives and forget to maintain the bridge between them. He had told himself approximately every 2 months for 8 months that he would call. He called. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice had that particular guardedness of someone who loves you and has learned not to expect too much. "Oh," she said. "Hey, Janice," he said. "I know it's been a while." Brief pause. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry about that." He meant it in the clean, uncomplicated way that Thomas Parker meant things. "I'm going to tell you about a week I had, if you have time." Another pause. This time, then her voice shifted, that specific shift he remembered from childhood that meant she decided to let him in. "I have time," she said. Cole leaned back on the couch. He told her everything. From the diner, to the parking lot, to the quilt, to the notebook, to the stone in the backfield that said he showed up to the gloves inside his vest, to the woman from 2 counties over on the porch on Sunday afternoon. He told it the way Thomas had told him about Michael not performing it, not dramatizing it, just laying it down in the order it happened and trusting it to carry its own weight. Janice listened without interrupting. This was unusual for her, understood it as the highest form of respect she could give him because Janice had opinions and normally expressed them without excessive delay. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Cole," she said, "I'm glad you called." "Me too," he said. "Oh, this family," she said. "These people." He could hear her working through something. The way she worked through things out loud, in real time, ideas against their own sound. "You're going back. End of the month," he said. "After that?" "And after that," he said. She understood what that meant. Quiet for a moment. "Rachel would be glad," she said. "Really?" Directly, the way she said things. Cole pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. There for a moment. "I think so too," he said. For another hour. About Memphis. About her kids who were almost grown. The things that had accumulated 8 in 8 months of not talking that needed to be said. They said goodnight. Something between night, some between them that had been slightly out of alignment had moved back toward where it was supposed to be. Cole set the phone down. He sat in the house that was too quiet. I'd be there. He reached into his vest and took out the gloves. Set them on the coffee table. He looked at them, the dark leather, repaired thumb, the chalk line across the left palm, about what Thomas had said. These belonged to a man who built things, not just houses, not just machines, people. He thought about the ride back on Route 7, the red rooster on the mailbox, the way he'd lifted one hand as he went, about Thomas and Evelyn, standing in the drive, watching him go, already knowing he was coming back. He sat in the quiet of his Knoxville house and felt, for the first time in 11 years, that the quiet was not the enemy. It had never been the enemy. It had just been the place where everything true lived. And he had been afraid to go there because he'd known, on some level, that everything true would include grief. It did include grief. Of course it did. But it also included the gloves on the coffee table, the ring on his right hand, and Michael Parker's notebook in the back room of a farmhouse with a new line added at the end. Thomas Parker's grip, and Evelyn Parker's voice saying, "You showed up," and Dirtbag with a napkin diagram of the correct brisket technique from a woman who had been making brisket since before Dirtbag was born. Garrett's small flag beside a memorial stone, and 40 people at a table that shouldn't have existed. And his sister's voice saying, "I'm glad you called." All of it was in the quiet. He had just needed to stop long enough to hear it. 3 weeks later, Cole rode back to the Parker farm and came alone this time. No chapter, no convoy, no planning. He came the way you come to a place that belongs to you directly. Announcement, expecting to be let in. The red rooster was on the mailbox. He turned down. The gravel drive, Thomas heard the bike from the barn and came out before Cole had cut the engine. Walked across the yard with that slow, deliberate step. All dismounted, and they shook hands. And Thomas looked at him the way he'd looked at him. The first night, the one that takes inventory and finds the account in order. "You look better," Thomas said. "I feel better," Cole said. Thomas said, "Come see what I've been working on." They went to the barn. Thomas had been rebuilding a piece of equipment that had been sitting unusable. For 2 years, the right parts had been hard to find. "I'm harder." Cole looked at it and asked the right questions, and Thomas showed him the mechanism, and they spent an hour working on it side by side, talking much, in the comfortable silence that had established itself between them on the very first morning. Evelyn had lunch on the table at noon, as though she'd known exactly when Cole would arrive, which Cole was beginning to think she probably had. At the table, Thomas looked at Cole's right hand. "At the ring. You're wearing it," he said. Not a question, an observation. "I'll always wear it," Cole said. "But I understand it differently now." Thomas nodded. "How so?" Cole looked at the ring for a moment. "Before, I wore it because I couldn't let go," he said. "Now I wear it because I don't need to let go." Not the same thing. He looked up. "Rachel was my family." Being true. "I just understand now that family doesn't end where you think it does." Thomas looked at him steadily. "Oh," he said, "it doesn't." Evelyn set down her fork. She looked at both of them with the clear, calm expression of a woman who has lived long enough to understand that most of the things men take a long time to work out are things she knew 30 years ago. Who has also lived long enough to understand that the working out is part of the point. "Oh," she said. He looked at her. "Michael's room," she said. "A room too, whenever you need it." Cole held her gaze. With the quilt and the bookshelf and the notebook on the desk, come to the last page, where one new line had been added in a different hand, that had been kept ready years. The roomie for 8 years with a patience and a love that most people would have called grief, but that Thomas and Evelyn had always known was something else. It had been kept ready for something that was coming. "Thank you," Cole said. After lunch, both of them walked to the backfield. The October air was even colder now than it had been on that first weekend. Memorial Stone was clean and level, the rail fence solid, small flag still there, holding its mouseplace position against the wind. They stood in front of the stone. He showed up. Cole put his hand in his vest, the gloves against his palm. He kept them there. The famous stood on the left. Evelyn stood on the right, stood between them, and without anyone planning it or suggesting it, Evelyn looped her arm through Cole's, and Thomas put his hand on Cole's shoulder, and the three of them stood in front of that stone, the way family stands close, aligned, holding each other's weight without making a production of it. Moved through the field. Cole thought about the road. Rachel, about 30 years of a debt finally paid. A young man who had put his hands into a burning car and walked away without leaving a name, and then spent the rest of his life doing exactly that, reaching in, pulling people out, walking away before they could ask who he was. About the notebook line he'd written, "I found you. Thank you for finding me." First, he thought about all the people across the country who had read Pat Crenshaw's story and felt something. Calls that had been made, all the tables that had been sat down at, the gloves, metaphorical and literal, that had been picked up and held. Parker had been gone 8 years, and his kindness had never once stopped moving. Anderson stood in the back field of the Parker farm, with Thomas on one side and Evelyn on the other, and he understood in his bones, the way you understand things that have been worked into you by experience rather than by being told what it meant to build something that outlasted you. You did not build it with lumber or fences or money or plans. You built it the way Michael built it. You showed up every day to every person in every moment that asked something of you. You showed up. You put your hands in. You confirmed they were breathing. Leg down, help, and then step back without waiting to be thanked. You did it because you understood the way Michael had understood at 26 years old after his first bad call, that this was what you were here for. Not the glory of it, not credit, just the showing up. Cole had been given 30 extra years. He intended to use every one of them. The wind settled. Legs stood straight. Thomas's hand was warm and heavy on Cole's shoulder. Anderson, road captain, widower, 17-year-old kid who'd been pulled from a burning car on a January night and hadn't known whose hands did the pulling until 30 years later. Cole Anderson stood in the quiet back field of the Parker farm and finally, completely, irrevocably understood where he was. He was home. The home he'd been born into, not the home he'd built with Rachel, the chapter house in Knoxville or the 60,000 miles of open road. All those were home too. But this farm, this stone, these two people, this family made of nothing but love and loss, and the deliberate, early choice to keep the door open, this was home, in the way that only a few places in a life get to be home. The kind you find when you stop running, the kind that was waiting for you the whole time.